Well, it's a pleasure to be here back at Hillsdale College, especially on a day where you named a chair after my graduate microeconomics professor, the late, great Walter E. Williams. Walter, of course, would tell his students that the E stood for excellence. And I have no doubt that Hillsdale will continue a tradition of excellence in his name. When it comes to cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance, or DeFi, there seems to be a tendency for people to overstate their case. Some proponents of cryptocurrencies, they say that they will inevitably replace the government-issued monies, that everything will eventually be recorded on a blockchain, that DeFi will render banks and other financial institutions irrelevant. Those unimpressed with crypto, in contrast, they describe it as worthless, as lacking any benefit whatsoever. If you've spent any time interacting in this space, no doubt you have come across these extreme views. They are pervasive. And although it's possible that cryptocurrencies will radically reshape money and finance such that it looks nothing like it does today, or that it all turns out to be worthless, there is a vast range of possibilities between these two extremes. In that range, a cryptocurrency might be used for niche payments. It might be used by those who lack good alternatives, while most of us carry on as we have before. Crypto might enable transactions or contractual relationships that would otherwise be too costly to justify. It might make it possible for some to opt out of traditional payment and financial services entirely, while others supplement those services with crypto alternatives, and still others find no use for crypto at all. Crypto need not be an all or nothing proposition. And indeed, few things in economics are. Now, today, we're going to consider the prospect of crypto as parallel currency. And looking around the room, no doubt some of us are at very different starting places. Some folks here are perhaps crypto novices, while others are crypto pros. So we're going to start with the basics. What is a cryptocurrency? How does the blockchain technology work? Then we'll consider some potential benefits of cryptocurrencies, and finally, we'll assess the extent to which crypto is likely to be used in the future. So let's get started. A cryptocurrency is a digital asset designed to function as a medium of exchange, a medium through which we exchange the goods and services we have for the goods and services we want. A medium of exchange with transactions processed via distributed ledger technology or a blockchain technology. Now, the first part of this definition probably sounds familiar. We're used to making payments with digital assets. Your checking account balance is a digital asset. When you swipe your debit card or initiate an electronic funds transfer, you're making a digital payment. Perhaps you have a PayPal account, or maybe you use Venmo or Square's Cash App. If so, you are transferring digital assets that were designed to function as a medium of exchange. But those assets are not cryptocurrencies. Why not? Well, payments sent from your checking account or Venmo balance are not processed using the blockchain technology. the blockchain technology is what separates cryptocurrencies from other digital media of exchange. Now, unless you're a nerdy monetary economist like me, you probably haven't given much thought to how payments are processed. No harm there. So let's start with an asset that we're all familiar with, cash. Cash is physical. If you buy a dozen donuts with cash, I'm a big fan of buying a dozen donuts. If you buy a dozen donuts with cash, you hand over the cash. Your cash account gets debited, the merchant's cash account gets credited. And that happens the moment you hand over that physical asset. This transaction is processed between you and the merchant without relying on any trusted third party. We call this a decentralized clearing mechanism. We call it that because the transaction is processed between the two parties of the transaction. You can see this here in the image that I've shown here. These nodes, the little circles, they indicate a party to the transaction. The line between those two nodes indicates a payment that's being made, and you can see that that payment is going from one node to another without reference to any other node. These transactions are cleared or processed via this decentralized payment mechanism between the two parties of the transaction. That's how decentralized clearing works. Now, decentralized clearing works pretty well for physical assets. It does not work very well for digital assets. Think about a photo on your phone. You can transfer that photo to someone else without relinquishing ownership of that photo. You have the photo, the person you sent it to has the photo, you both have the photo. That digital photo would not work very well as a money. You could make payments with that photo without actually giving up that payment mechanism. Not going to work. Not going to work. Traditionally, the way we have processed digital payments is by relying on some trusted third party to clear the transaction on our behalf. Suppose that instead of using cash, you were to swipe your debit card. In that case, your bank debits your account and credits the merchant's account, just like we saw with physical cash, but now the bank is ensuring that you don't send that digital balance more than once. We call this a centralized clearing mechanism because the payment passes through some central node, in that case, the bank. So you can see that in this image here. Again, those little nodes, they indicate the parties to the transaction. But now, to pass a balance from one party to another, that payment has to pass through some central node. We can imagine a more complicated system. This works pretty well if we have two customers of the same bank, then that will just pass through a single node. But we might imagine transactions then between those banks, and so now we have a central clearinghouse between our central clearinghouses. And so we can scale this up as much as we would need to. So here in the United States, for example, we have the Clearinghouse Interbank Payment System and Fedwire that clears bank payments between banks. And so that would be a central clearing mechanism on top of a central clearing mechanism. I'm sure that you've all heard of Bitcoin. When Bitcoin was launched in 2009, it offered a fundamentally new way of processing payments. It didn't use a decentralized clearing mechanism. It didn't use a centralized clearing mechanism. Instead, it processes payments using a distributed payment mechanism. So suppose that you buy some donuts with Bitcoin. In that case, the network of computers running the Bitcoin protocol, they update a shared ledger, the Bitcoin blockchain. They update that shared ledger to reflect the fact that your account has been debited and the merchant's account has been credited. It's the same thing that happens when you swipe your debit card or pay with cash. It's just that on the back end, that transaction is processed in a very different way. Instead of relying on the two parties of the transaction to process it, instead of going through some trusted third party, the Bitcoin protocol and other cryptocurrencies rely on the network as a whole to update that shared ledger. Let's dig in a little bit deeper here. We want to see how this blockchain technology works. So when you initiate a transaction, that transaction gets grouped together with other transactions to form a block of transactions. Then this block of transactions gets chained to the previous block of transactions. And so this shared ledger or blockchain, a chain of blocks of transactions, now reflects the most recent transactions that have been made. Let's go a little bit deeper. How does this work? Well, again, those transactions are included in a block. And those running the protocol, they update this ledger by first taking the previous block header and running that block header through a hash function to produce an output, a new block header. Right? That's what makes this chain. And that output has to be an appropriate block header. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And this process happens again and again and again, chaining this block of transactions to the previous block of transactions, updating the ledger by the network as a whole. So a blockchain is just a shared ledger and a protocol for updating that ledger. That blockchain technology enables digital transactions without relying on some trusted third party. So who gets to update this shared ledger? Or more precisely, how do we determine who gets to update this shared ledger? Well, that depends. It depends on the type of protocol that a particular cryptocurrency is using. Bitcoin, for example, uses a proof of work mechanism. With proof of work, producing an appropriate hash is difficult. Now, let me be clear. It's not difficult to produce a hash, but with Bitcoin, it's difficult to produce an appropriate hash. And that's because in order for a hash to be considered appropriate, it has to have a specific number of leading zeros. And so what will happen is that if a miner hashes the block but doesn't get enough leading zeros, he has to try again and again and again and again until someone doesn't merely produce a hash, but produces a hash that has enough leading zeros. Right? That hash, that output, will be recognized as an appropriate hash of the block. So what does that mean? Well, that means that miners have a random chance of producing an appropriate hash where the probability of success depends on their computing power relative to the computing power of the network as a whole. Randomizing who hashes a block of transactions is crucial for this blockchain technology to work. So long as I have less than 50%, less than a 50% chance of updating this shared ledger, I won't be able to ensure that an inappropriate update to the ledger persists. If I refuse to include your transaction, the next person updating the ledger will include it. If I don't have enough power, I can't stop that because I don't have enough power to cut you out. If I include an unauthorized transaction, the next person updating the ledger will just disregard my update. I don't have enough power to ensure that my version of the ledger persists, that it's the version of the ledger that other people build upon. So the best I can do, the best anyone can do running this protocol, is update the ledger honestly. so that others will build on my chain, and I will secure the transaction fees and block rewards associated with my update to the ledger.